Good afternoon. My name is Gabe Elias, and as chairman of the Associated Student Speakers Program, I would like to welcome you to our 5th program of the fall quarter. Today we have with us producer of the TV series All in the Family, Mr. Norman Lear. Mr. Lear is one of those rare men who has achieved success at 3 levels, as a writer, director, and a producer, each of which is quite enough even for the most talented of men. Without a doubt, no project is closer to Mr. Lear's heart than All in the Family. Everyone connected with the show calls it Norman's baby. So, for a behind-the-scenes look at how All in the Family came into being, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Norman Lear.
Thank you very much. Could I ask a favor of you and ask you all to come in closer? I understand we're competing with a rock contest today. And if you see any strange motion from me up here, you'll know that it's the music back there. But why don't we all get up, come in a little closer? Those people in the back, come on, move down, and we'll have it'll be much more comfortable. Yeah, back there. Come on in and fill in up front here. Won't you? And then we'll all be more comfortable. And if you don't mind, I'll take off my jacket, which comes off. The mustache does not. I didn't know that there was going to be a rock concert back there, and it may make it impractical for talking, but not for dancing. So I think that there are enough ladies to dance with here, so the fellas will all be all right. I don't know where to begin to talk about All in the Family. I'm not a prepared speaker in the sense that I go about the world lecturing about anything, including All in the Family, but I have a great deal that I think about it. And usually I find I speak about it better when I'm asked questions, but there are some things about it, its history, that you might be interested in knowing. And let me tell you first that it began about 4 years ago. 4 years ago I read in TV Guide a 1-paragraph item about a show in England called Till Death Do Us Part, which had to do with a bigoted father and a son-in-law who fought constantly. And I saw my father and I instantly, and the life we had led together until at age 17 or so. I think once I went to college, I was never really back in the house again. But through those first 17 years, many of the arguments that were in the early shows in All in the Family between Mike and Archie were arguments that my father and I really had. My father used to say, you're the laziest white kid I ever knew. And I'd say, how could you put a whole race down just to tell me I'm lazy? And he couldn't understand for any reason in the world why he was putting down a race when he said that I was the laziest white man. And we'd fight about that constantly. And so when I saw this thing in TV Guide, I knew, there was a very funny television show in this, and parenthetically I must tell you that I had always avoided situation comedy in my career, which is now some 24 years old, I guess. I never wrote a half-hour situation comedy show, not an episode, let alone produced one or had been involved in any serious way with one. This was the first time an idea presented itself that made me want to do it, but instantly. Now, a couple of interesting things about that. It occurred at a time when I was editing the first motion picture that I had directed. I had produced many and written many, but I had never directed a film before, and I had the opportunity to wear all 3 hats this one time. And the picture was Cold Turkey. And I was in the editing process of that film, and I had just experienced the happiest 4 months of my life. I adored directing a motion picture and couldn't wait to do another one when I have skipped ahead of myself. And I'll get back to this in just a moment. 4 years before, when I found that little item in TV Guide, I got the rights to the property from the people in England. I went to ABC. They immediately made a deal to make the pilot. I looked at actors and actresses, found Gene Stapleton and Carol O'Connor, and made the pilot in New York City. The network saw it. The network loved it. The network asked for me to recast the two young people. I made the same pilot again, and then time went by and their option dropped and they never put it on the air. They never could screw up the courage to do so. Now, we lap dissolve, and it is this many years later, 3.5 years later, and I am editing Cold Turkey and CBS. There's a new change in the echelon at CBS. There's a new president and a new vice president of the network, and they want to do something daring. They want to try something new, and somebody somewhere had suggested, because I didn't know the gentleman, why don't they take a look at this show? And at that time it was called Those Were the Days. And this is going to be fun. And it was called Those Were the Days. They looked at it and they loved it, and they immediately asked for a series of meetings. And out of those series of meetings grew the series. It took a long time. They made a deal quite quickly to make 13 episodes. But to make them is one thing, to air them is quite another. And I can tell you that it wasn't until 5 minutes after 7 on the night before we were to air the first episode that I could call home and tell my wife, yes, we were on tomorrow night. We had already made 4 shows, but I had no guarantee. I was still fighting until that last moment about the contents of that show. Some deletions the network wished to make, which I refused to make, and it wasn't until 5 minutes after 7 that the night before, that I finally realized, that they finally told me, okay, and we hung up, and I knew the show was going to be on. Now a funny thing has happened all this time later, and I go back to Cold Turkey again. How many of you may have seen that picture? Perhaps a quarter of you, 10% of you, I don't know. It's coming back. I'd love to bring it here sometime and run it and talk about it. It happens to be something I love very much. But I like it because it had something to say about what's happening to and I hardly knew it could, but it has something to say about what's happening with All in the Family now. Because Cold Turkey had to do, in part, one of the themes of Cold Turkey had to do with this American phenomenon of what happens when a little bit of interest is generated on a small subject, and then the mass media gets to it, you know. A little town in Iowa is going to give up smoking, so it's of interest to a newspaper. And that newspaper influences another newspaper, which finally gets to influence the New York Times, which sends a representative, which means that David Brinkley cannot be far behind. So Walter Cronkite cannot be far behind. So Newsweek and Time cannot be far behind, and Life and Look and so forth and so forth. And blown all out of proportion suddenly is something that might otherwise have just occupied the normal amount of attention of the American public, even though it might have been an enormous success. But you don't know at what point it... I don't know that it's... what do you think? What do you think? Can you hear me? I mean, I know what I'm saying, but I don't know whether you can hear me. Okay. Anyway, All in the Family is caught up in that little maelstrom now. It's actually happened. Life magazine suddenly, months and months and months ago, when we needed publicity because we were looking for rating, wasn't interested in all. Still the same answer? I think it's impossible. Listen, I want you, don't feel badly, because Nixon doesn't do any better than this. Nothing is... You can hear me. I'll do anything you say, really. Should we continue this way? Okay. Every once in a while I do feel like singing, I'll just sing. That's all. All right, questions. I don't remember where I was finishing. Did you get the point of the cold turkey analogy? It's just fascinating to me that I thought I tried very hard to make that point in the motion picture, and then found myself just a few months later caught up in the same point I was trying to make. And it's great fun, but it's interesting to watch the phenomenon work. Yes, ma'am. See, it's impossible for anybody else to hear you. Well, why don't you come up here and ask the question in the microphone?
Well, the first time I saw All in the Family, I was really shocked because it didn't seem like the sort of thing television would have courage enough to put on. With all the hassle that the Smothers Brothers had, I thought All in the Family might have had something similar. Have you? Have you had the hassle that...
I know. All the hassle I had was right before the very first show. I had, well, it's interesting. This question comes up in this meeting this day. Before the very first show, as I told you, they wanted certain deletions made, and I refused to make them, and that's why it wasn't until the night before that I ever knew that the show for sure would air. There was almost no publicity about it, and the network was being very quiet about it, and I didn't know for sure that it would air, though they, of course, were contracted to pay for 13. From that moment until very recently, I have not had a single argument about the content of the show. But there's a show coming up in 3 weeks, over which we have been battling for 6 weeks. I made the show, let's see, we made it 6.5, 7 weeks ago, and we love the show, and it had to do with Mike's being impotent, because he was very anxious over a set of exams he was about to take, and he and Gloria just weren't making it. And it was causing great anxiety between the two of them and a lot of hardship. And that spilled over into the older generation who couldn't even hear of it. You know, I mean, they were berserk when they learned about the subject matter of the fight between Mike and Gloria. Anyway, that's what the show is about. I think it is extremely tasteful. I would not be ashamed to have children of any age look. I think the worst thing that can happen with a small child would be that 7-year-old would turn to his mother and father and say, what does that mean? And a mother and father in America or somewhere would have to turn and talk to his child. And I think that's the worst thing that can happen with that kind of thing. Anyway, that was my argument when they said this show will not be on. And it wasn't until 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, after an exceedingly agonizing period, that show was finally approved as we made it, and it will be on November 20th. So you can look for it then. But until that moment, I thought maybe All in the Family was all over, because that was my point of view, you know. And I think the cast and the director, John Rich, all of us felt the same way. I think we might have all bailed out.
How similar is All in the Family to the British version, and is it true that the Americanized All in the Family is a lot cleaner than the British show? That a lot of what was in the British show was censored, that couldn't go on air here?
No, I don't think so. There were any number. I only saw one of the British shows. There were a great many words I didn't understand. I didn't know what it meant when he called her a bloody moo. Now that could have a connotation in England that's filthy, for all I know. I don't know. Our show is very much different in that they were deliberately conceived as stick figures. The guy was called by most of the critics over there a madman. He was insane. Also, they were on 6 times a year, you see. We have already made 2 more shows than they made in 3.5 years. And we've only been on we haven't been on one full season yet. We've made 2 more. Shows you the speed at which America goes. We have already made 2 more shows than they made it, because they did 6. They were off for 3 months. Then they did 4. And those stick figures could last on that basis. When I say stick figures, I mean there were no other values to him. He was out and out no good, rotten. He hated his wife. She hated him back. There were no nuances to the relationships. It was just straight hate everywhere. When our show played over there, as it's doing now, it was reviewed as very much there. They don't consider it the same at all. It's like 2 different shows. Sir.
The CBS network in the past few years has been having a lot of trouble with its employees. A few years ago, they fired Danny Blanchflower for his controversial soccer commentary, and they had trouble with the Smothers Brothers. And there have been many other incidents, and newscasters. Frank Gifford has left CBS, and so has Harry Reasoner. And is something happening at CBS, and what is your opinion of the management at CBS?
Well, I can only judge my own experience, and I've given you my most recent experience. They came to me in what I have to assume, and I do assume, is good faith. They thought that the subject of impotency, however we handled it, first, they thought was improper. When we got past that, then they thought certain sections of the show were wrong. And when they got past that, then they thought fewer sections were wrong. And then finally we disbanded with the whole discussion. But I've had, from the first show to this minute, not one iota of trouble, and don't expect any past this minute. So I don't know what's going on with Mr. Reasoner and the others. I know that All in the Family, the American public has kind of set the parameters for All in the Family. And CBS doesn't know what's hit it, and doesn't know where to draw any kind of a line. See, in my opinion, they've misjudged the country completely, just as I think the think tanks in the East, and usually in the East, have on many levels, politically, economically, socially, in every which way, have always misjudged and looked down on, miscalculate the broad mainstream of American life. They don't trust it. They think they're going to do something wrong with they think they're going to take All in the Family and run through the streets, and I don't know what they're going to do with it. But they're not. Both of you, come on up.
Was there any negative reaction from well-meaning liberal groups who found some of the content of the show objectionable when you first did it?
No, not at the beginning. At the beginning, all of the talk was very positive. But recently, if you followed the New York Times, there's been a big dialogue in the New York Times where one lady especially, Laura Z. Hobson, who wrote Gentleman's Agreement, was devoted half of the theater section of, I forget the date, but it was about 7 weeks ago. And she did a big attack on All in the Family because it didn't present Archie as a virulent bigot. Because there is no such thing, was her thesis, as a lovable bigot. And he wasn't hateful enough. There were things about him one could like. People were liking those things about him, and therefore it could do great harm. And anyway, that was her thesis. I answered it some weeks later, and my point was that I found bigotry not just on Archie's level, but on my level, and I'm talking about economic and opportunity levels, and stratas way above mine. And I wondered when I answered Miss Hobson, who does more harm, the Archie Bunkers, who may in their lifetime offend 20 blacks personally in a interpersonal conflict of some kind, and a few other minorities, or some of those lovely liberals who may be contributing to the NAACP and the ACLU, but have never given a black man a good job in a business they own that employs thousands. You know, it's everywhere. I think we all connect directly to Mr. Bunker, and there is, because if bigotry were to disappear from all of the so-called good people tomorrow, do you really think there'd be a problem? I mean, if it just left all the good people in the world, you know, at 1 o'clock this afternoon, then what kind of a problem would we have? We'd be able to handle the lawbreakers. The rest of us would be just Snow White, and there'd be no problem.
Would you say how you got your start in the film industry, and what you think today, like today, how you think people, what a kid who's got a good idea should do with it in today's film industry? That is, with the big studios, employment, I mean, laying off people, but the independent film production increasing a lot. Would you say what you would do if you were in, say, you know, being a young person with a good idea for a film, say? But do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I know what you're trying to say. I'm trying to think of my answer. It's hard. First of all, the best advice anybody ever gave a writer, and I forget who gave it first, was to write. And the same thing would be true of a director. If he couldn't be directing a film at the moment, he ought to be directing plays anywhere he can stage them, in living rooms, in storefronts, any place. And a producer ought to be producing those plays. I mean, those people who want to do those things should be doing those things. If they can't do it in their medium at the moment, should be doing it anywhere they can do it, as much as they can do it, and not waiting for, quote, opportunities. Then I would say that there are very brilliant guys who have very brilliant ideas, who don't have the aggressivity to take it perhaps and get someplace past a door or a telephone, you know, to that next stop. And then maybe he has to seek out a partner who has that, with whom he can communicate, you know, who has that other ingredient, and the two of them together can make it. Opportunities were never any greater for young people and for new people than they are today. I'm sure everything that's happening in the industry, I'm not talking about television now, I'm talking about films, is illustrative of that. You know, I mean, they're popping up from everywhere, and making films for very little money, and they're not all being financed by majors or minors or even motion picture people. Companies from Dallas and Chicago and New York, and people in the serial business and whatnot are all financing films today. So, have I answered that? I'd love to really answer that question, because I know how much is involved in that question. But I can only tell you that the opportunities are there, and I know that if you can't be making a film, be doing something in a living room, be staging something, be writing something, be doing something with what you do.
I have 3 questions. First of all, is the series going to be renewed?
Yes. That's not I don't have an official word on that, but there's no way it can't be, because it's in the top 5 all the time.
Secondly, I've noticed you're doing it on videotape, and I'd like to know where you do it. And also, are there any other series on television now that you know of being done on videotape? And then thirdly, do you think the fact that perhaps some of the right-wing conservative people identify with Archie is helping the show's ratings? You know, like every time he gets in his blow, like last week when the gay liberation guy came to the door, and you know he puts his blows in. Do you feel that the conservatives are identifying with him, and that's helping the show's ratings?
First of all, we do the show at CBS Television City at Fairfax and Beverly. And to the best of my knowledge, at the moment, we are the only show that's on tape. That won't be true next season because there are any number of shows being prepared now because All in the Family is successful on tape, and it feels much more like a theater experience than anything else. It's attracted a lot of attention among other producers and the networks, and so there'll be a lot of tape shows. The answer to the other question, what was the other question? Oh, the answer, the last part of the other question first. Do I think that that Archie's attracting attention and doing some helping with Archie? Yeah, I think there are some conservatives who will identify with Archie and make him a hero, and I think everybody deserves a hero. And I think if there are some hard hats somewhere who want a hero and they make a fool like Archie a hero, God bless them. Thank God they made a fool a hero. You know, I'm glad there's nobody else around. The specific reference you make, however, I want to remind you of something else that happened in that scene when the gentleman from Gay Lib and the woman and the daughters and the lady from the Daughters of Sappho came to the door. Archie made a few remarks, which got some very big laughs, and then Archie said, "Let's see what they stand for here," and he read, "Two people may do whatever, but it should be the law that two people." Adults may do whatever they wish in private, whatever that legal term is. And Edith, on a single shot, very quietly said, "Why should there be a law for something like that?" Now that's why the scene was in the show. Now that will go past those people you're talking about who wish to laugh at the... but a lot of other people heard that line. And we would not have played the first part of it if we couldn't have played the last line. You know, if we hadn't had that idea, we'd never have done the other. Sir.
Would you mention if there's anything special you find in any of the particular characters besides just Archie? If there's anything you try to put in each of the characters in particular? No, I don't know. There's no thought about what should go into the particular characters. We've kind of discovered them as we've been writing them too. I learn a lot about who they are from what I read. I really do. We get a lot of mail, and some of them from some perfectly wonderful, intelligent people, right and left. And you read a lot of it, and you begin to learn who the people are. And what else besides, and don't forget, I'm in the business of entertainment. That's my primary obligation. And so I'm not thinking each time, what message is this show going to carry? It's just that the kind of man Archie is and the kind of boy Mike is determines what they say to each other. And no matter what subject we start with, like something so simple as, next week's show, Edith had an accident with a can of peaches, and you'd think that show would have absolutely nothing of any social consequence at all. But they get into an argument about stealing and whether we all steal or we don't steal, and how much stealing goes on in this country, and so, and it's perfectly lovely. And it grew out of the characters. We had no idea we were getting into it. We were just telling a simple, funny story about an accident that Edith had.
Why was New York City chosen as the setting for the program?
Because before that, the mass media had... I never saw a bigot that I believe that wasn't... except for Joe. And we made the pilot for All in the Family several years before Joe. Bigots are always Southerners, or always Midwesterners. They're always redneck sheriffs or something like that, And I've sat with enough New York cab drivers and lived with enough uncles and whatnot to know
that in the East, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, New York too, we have some of our own good homegrown bigots right there in the heart of liberalism, so-called heart of liberalism. So we just didn't want to pin it again on another part of the country, in a section of the country that had been used that way so much before.
How do you choose which issues you're going to do a show about?
They just happen, ma'am. They just happen. Writers come in and say, hey, have you ever done anything about? Or wouldn't it be funny if Archie? Or have you thought about Edith? We have in progress now a show about Edith entering menopause. And it started just because somebody said, do you think you could do a story about Edith entering menopause? And I said, sure we could. Have you got an idea? He said, no, but the subject, I said, the subject is sensational. Let's try it. Came out of that.
I don't believe you answered the question about how you got started in the whole business. No, I don't think so.
She doesn't believe I answered the question about how I got started. How did I get started? Well, it was a long time ago, and I came out here. I had always wanted to be a press agent. I've written a lot in school, but I wanted to be a press agent because I only had one uncle on both sides of my family who could afford to throw a nephew a quarter every time you saw him. My Uncle Jack always threw me a quarter. And my mother's side of the family and my father's side of the family, only Uncle Jack could ever do that. He threw all his nephews a quarter. And he was a press agent. So I wanted to be a press agent. And when I got out of the service in 1945, I came to California. I was in New York for 2 years as a press agent. For 2 years, and then I came out here, and I tried to get a job as a press agent in a very depressed time in California. I was married, I had one little girl, and I met a fellow who wanted to become a comedy writer. So we started to write together in the evenings. We sold baby pictures during the day, and we wrote together in the evenings, and we used to go to places like the Bar of Music, long deceased, and little clubs around town, and try to sell parodies for $25 or 15 or whatever we could get. And with the first sale, I realized I had made more with one little stanza than I had made in 2 whole days, breaking my back selling these baby pictures door to door. So I determined that I would use that facility for writing for press to try to write for comedy, and had an idea within a couple of days for a Danny Thomas routine. I thought would be good for Danny Thomas. Am I going too far? Is this interesting? I never know whether these damn things are interesting. What? No, it's a fellow by the name of Ed Simmons. Bud Yorkin came some years later. I never know when one's talking about oneself how interesting it is. But where was I in that? Oh, Danny Thomas, yeah. I had an idea for Danny Thomas. I didn't know how to get a hold of him, so I learned his agent was William Morris. And I had a name that I used to use in the Army. If MP stopped me, I always said I was Merle Robinson. Never asked me why. I never knew a Merle Robinson, but I loved the name, and I always said I was Merle Robinson. So I called William Morris, and as fast as I could talk, I said, my name is Merle Robinson. I'm with the New York Times. I'm leaving for the airport right away. I've only got a couple of hours. I have to talk with Danny Thomas. I'm finishing off a story on Hollywood. I need a very important quote from Mr. May I have his phone? And they gave me his phone number instantly. And I called Danny Thomas, and I said, you don't know me. It doesn't matter who I am. I have a fantastic number for you. It only runs 7-8 minutes. And he said, hold on, because I was talking very fast. I thought I had to. And he said, hold on. He said, how fast can you get over with it? I said, in about 3 hours, because I had to write it. He didn't know that. And he said, well, I'm working with my accompanist. Anyway, make that long story short, I wrote this thing right away and ran over to his house, and he was doing a Friar's Frolic at Ciro's, also deceased, on Sunset Boulevard, and it was just for the industry. And he needed one brand new thing that he didn't have, and that's the only reason he listened to some stranger on the phone, because he had no new short hunk that he could use. And he loved this thing I brought him, and he did it at that show. And the next morning I had a call. It was a Thursday morning, I remember. I had a call from an agent who was at the Friar's Frolic, who asked me had I ever written for television, and I said of course I had, and I had not. And he said, can you be in New York on Saturday to a weekly 1-hour television show? Will you accept $350 a week? Which was, I choked. And I ran to my neighbor who was an actor, and I got several television scripts from him so I could see how they were written on the page, what the form was. And I studied those on the plane. I got off the plane and I started to write television. That's how that happened. It's not your average story. Sir. If there is a message to all in the family, I don't know. I'd much rather have you tell me, and it may be a message that you don't like. I'd like not to answer that question because any answer is too self-serving. There are messages in there. I'm not foolish enough not to see them, but I'd much rather hear from you what you think they are and discuss them with you. I can tell you this: we don't sit down to preach to America. Or tell it how it ought to live or anything. We do reflect how we feel it is, but we're not trying to tell it what to do. I've often been asked, what good do you think it will do in terms of bigotry? And I have facetiously, in quotes, often answered, about as much good as Christianity, because I don't see that anything has helped thus far. So I don't know what on earth we're going to expect from a half-hour situation comedy. But if people think it can, I love it. Have I disappointed you? Is there anything else you'd like to say? Sir. Gentleman's asking what kind of mail we get. We used to get a very great deal of mail. We get less mail now. We used to get a great deal of passionate mail. The show is really accepted now, so we only hear when people are extraordinarily moved to love a show or to hate it. When we had the 2 black burglars some weeks ago enter the bunker home, we scared some of Middle America to death. We heard from towns in Middle America where there are no blacks and no race problem of any kind, and they wrote about how they were scared to death of being murdered in their beds and so forth, by Negroes, and how could we do this thing and scare them and so on. And we had perhaps more than equivalent amount of mail from people who thought the show had the most extraordinary message, and they were grateful for it, and some of those letters came from the Midwest. You come up here so they can hear, won't you?
How representative do you think it is of American lifestyle?
No, they heard it, but I didn't. Oh, no, nobody did.
How representative do you think it is of American lifestyle today?
How representative do I think it is of American lifestyle? Well, it's larger than life because it's an entertainment. You go to see the most realistic Broadway show, and they're standing on a stage talking to the second balcony. They need to be heard. This is a television show that needs to be seen, and it's an entertainment. Bye, love. And I think Archie and Edith and so forth are a little larger than life, but I think they are real people, and I think their real-life counterparts exist everywhere, and most people I talk to or hear from in the mails tell me that they know them. So I have to go by that. No. Though they may have had at the very beginning, but as soon as the rating, everything is rating in dollars in television, and there's never any trouble. As soon as the rating climbs, you know, they'll sponsor 14 murders a minute. Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, we tape this evening. We tape at 5:30 this afternoon. We do a dress rehearsal, which we tape before a live audience, and at 8 o'clock we do another performance, so that we have 2 pieces of tape from which to edit between. It's 5 days rehearsal, but the actors are really working almost 7 days. That's network reasoning, and that has to do with dollars, and perambulations is a word I hear a lot, and other kinds of things I really don't understand. Sir? How did I cast the show? I remembered Carol O'Connor from a small part in a picture that Blake Edwards made many years ago called What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? It was the only little piece of comedy that I'd ever seen him do. And I never forgot him. And Gene Stapleton had a small role in Rhinoceros that I remembered on Broadway. And a couple of other things I'd also seen her do. But that little piece in Rhinoceros really stuck in my mind. And so they weren't the only actors I talked to, but they were among the first few that I had in. And they were instantly it. It was very easy with those 2 roles. Can you pass the word up here? I haven't seen my competition. I don't know. Sir, come on up here so they can hear.
The author of Gentleman's Agreement wrote a criticism of the show in a paper, I imagine it was about a couple months ago. I wondered if you read it and what you thought about the feelings.
You came in a little bit later, didn't you? Yeah. Because I talked about that earlier. I not only read it, but I answered it, and the New York Times printed that answer. And I didn't think much of it. I'll answer it that way. I thought the lady was wrong. I'd answer you, but I don't want to repeat for everybody else. So I think you're going to have to come up here because it's impossible for people to hear the question.
Do you see a danger in having made Archie sort of a lovable bigot, that it'll make bigotry respectable in some way? That people will say, well, gee, Archie isn't such a bad guy anyway.
No, I hope not. I don't think so, because I think, if anything, it would make people look a little closer to home. Because, see, there are unlovable bigots, and we've had them for years in the mass media. You know, I mean, we've seen all the years you were growing up, much more in the years I was growing up. We've seen the white sheriff raping the black woman in the back of his squad car, or another minority member being castrated and then hung, and you know, I mean, real horrid. But that's not the kind of bigotry that has held back the minority, you know, those races. That's not the kind of bigotry that's really done all the harm. The kind of bigotry that's done the real harm, and not that that isn't harmful to the individual to whom it happens, but the bigotry that does the real harm is the bigotry that sits in the hearts of nice people, you know, who don't see it. Now, I think it's easier to relate to an Archie because there is something more human about him than those other one-dimensional, hating, you know, virulent bigots. There's something a little more to him. If you can relate to him, maybe it's possible to see a little bit of yourself there. And that's why I don't think in the long run he'll do any harm at all. Does what? Oh, he doesn't believe he's a bigot at all. When he's called a bigot, he defends himself eloquently. I mean, very convolutedly, but eloquently for him. He's not a bigot in his own eyes. If he were, he'd be unfunny totally. We're holding a conversation that the others can't hear. You have to get up and yell it out or something.
And Edith's position to Archie is, does she just ignore his bigotry, or is she supposed to be so dumb that it just sort of passes by her and she just answers straight to what he's saying? I mean, what's her? Because she doesn't seem to be at all bigoted. I mean, what's her position?
I think Edith is a lady who leads at least half of her life within herself. You know, I think somewhere deep inside Edith, she's Patty Andrews, and she's singing with her two sisters someplace, and she comes in from outer left field with the truth, always with the truth. I think Edith is one of God's fools, who brings the truth with an overabundance of love. I happen to love Edith and Gene Stapleton. And the whole cast, for that matter. Yes, ma'am. Are there episodes that I was dissatisfied with? We haven't made one that I have been dissatisfied with totally, but there are things in most of them that I am dissatisfied with. I wouldn't wish to, because then I'd be criticizing actors and so forth. You know. From the standpoint of certainly there are many points I think we could have. Many things too difficult to talk about. But there suffice to say, there isn't anything we do, and we do them live and make a great many mistakes, that I don't look at it and say, oh goodness, I wish I could do that again. Sometimes I go so far as to say, oh God, I wish I could do that again. Well, if you know tape, we're on a studio stage, and there's just so much we can do. We might if we had a good story, but I don't. Doesn't bother me. You know, the honeymooners, Jackie Gleason walked around that little table, and those old honeymooners for years. That's all I remember him doing, was walking around that table and screaming, and he was delicious. Ma'am. No, you came in a little later too, didn't you? Young lady, I think, is asking if I have to make many concessions to. Do I have to make concessions to sponsors in the network, in the scripts, and what I wish to say, or no? I mean, they'll come in and say he said hell 5 times in the dress rehearsal. Could you cut a couple of them? Well, I don't feel misused to ask Carol O'Connor to watch a couple of those hells. That's the kind of thing we do all the time. But I have no censorship situation with them at all. How what? The script isn't rigid at all. We work, we do. I don't think we've ever gone into rehearsal with a script that hasn't been rewritten 8 times. You know, it's that much work going into it. And then it's rewritten some more when the actors get with it and the director gets with it. They make still something more and always better of it. So it's never rigid. It can't be with a rehearsed live show, like a play. It only can be rigid if it's a film and you have no time for rehearsal, so you can't find things and you don't know where problems may exist that the writer didn't foresee. That it?
Is it one? Yes, ma'am. That applause was for you, you know.
In one of the episodes, Gloria had a miscarriage, and it ended on a completely different note than most of the other programs. And I was wondering if the audience response in the letters were different than you usually got. Were they more sympathetic or anything?
Well, it was a very touching moment, and people simply responded that way. And it showed another facet of Archie, and a lot of people resented that. That's the kind of thing that Miss Hobson resented. His daughter had a miscarriage, and where he didn't wish her pregnant, he didn't want to see her have a baby when she first announced her pregnancy. He had grown used to the idea of her being pregnant, and he wanted a grandchild. So when she had her miscarriage, he was feeling very, very badly about it. Now, Miss Hobson and other people who want their bigots pure and totally hateful didn't like the idea that this man could feel bad and have a warm, tender scene with a daughter who had just lost a baby. But I think it would have been unreal if he had done something else, if he had refused to visit his daughter. I don't know what I think anybody would have reacted the same way, and the response from the public was warm. It's 5 minutes to 1, and I think we have to stop after this question. I see a run-through on Monday night. I see a run-through on Friday. The Friday night is the first run-through I see, because we start rehearsal on Wednesday, Friday night, and this afternoon I will see a run-through, and I will be there at the dress and at the show. And then the rest of the time I'm working with the writers. That's it. Shall we go for one more? You're the boss. Through CBS. Call Z Network. Thank you very much, and thank you for putting up with this. Thank you.